in a constant state of fear and misery. Nobody understands me anymore. Live in a constant state of fear and misery. Nobody understands. Live in a constant state of fear and misery. Nobody understands me anymore. I don't even know this way anymore.
Hello, everybody. We're bringing you a Block Digest special edition with Mr. Chris Stewart on Tuesday, September 25th. What's going on, everybody?
Hey, what's going on, man? It's a nice Tuesday here. It feels like fall just broke in. How are you guys doing today? Janine?
I am going through years worth of several years worth of screenshots and finding a lot of interesting things, like the fact that 2016, a coworker of it was basically an interview with a bunch of people from Google's security team, and they were talking about how the reason they were promoting the HTTPS stuff was because they wanted to allow web pages to, quote, be able to reach deeper into your computer's resources, accessing sensitive information like location and offline data. So yeah, not exactly a good motivation.
Yeah, I'm shaking my head that whole thing, but I'm glad you got those screenshots and pulling that back up for us. It's interesting. But Chris, how are you doing today, man? It's good to have you on the show.
Doing great. Like you said, here in Iowa, it's feeling like fall as well. And I guess this week is off to a better start than last week in the Bitcoin ecosystem. So that's good, I guess.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
I guess, Rick, take her away. It's
Yeah,
time
like,
to grow, Chris.
just yeah, this is like you're saying, there's some interesting things going on in the past couple of weeks, which we'll dig into. But just to let the audience know what's going on, how this conversation came to be, you know, is I run this meetup here in town, and you guys know that have been following along. And there's a lot of Ethereum devs and lots of blockchain madness going on out here in Colorado. And, you know, there's a couple of maximalists that are always around, and I enjoy talking to them. And I ran across one of your guys working remotely out here who was saying that they were developing Lightning on Bitcoin, and really just blew my hair back to hear that here in Colorado. And, you know, got to meet your guy working out here for a while now and talk to him, and it's real interesting stuff you guys are doing. And he was talking about maybe having you on the show. And so that's how we came to meet. And yeah, so we were talking about, you know, this project you're working on, Suredbits, and, you know, it's a Lightning project as far as like trying to stream data to you know, make these micropayments and data streams. And but you've been working in he said you've been working in Bitcoin for 5+ years now, and you know, I figured it'd be interesting to just sort of catch up and how you got here and what you've been working on, and what you find interesting.
Yeah, so I'll give you the background story. So I first heard about Bitcoin in 2013. I was doing an internship at State Farm Automobile Insurance Companies as a software developer, just, you know, a general software developer. Was in the middle of Illinois and, you know, locked into a cornfield somewhere, like with not much to do with my nights and weekends. So I started reading about, you know, markets and stuff. And I was very, very interested at the time of like things like algorithmic trading, like high frequency trading. And I thought it'd be cool to do like some sort of a trading model basically and interact like directly with these exchanges. And the problem that I really ran into at that point in time was getting access to financial markets data. So getting access to like the New York Stock Exchange is like a data stream from the New York Stock Exchange at the time, or NASDAQ, or like direct access to these markets wasn't exactly a trivial problem. So I kept on like reading and trying to figure out exactly how to get access to this, and I came across something called Bitcoin at the time. I think Bitcoin had maybe spiked from thing from like $2 to like $66, or maybe it was like $100 or something. Came across, I think it was like a Business Insider piece, and read a couple articles about it. Promptly dismissed it as like some sort of Ponzi scheme by this Satoshi Nakamoto guy, and forgot about it, and like went along my way, finishing up this internship. So that was the first time I ever like really had exposure to Bitcoin, and like I found it surfing on the web pretty much like everybody else does, and thought it was a Ponzi scheme, and then didn't hear about it for a couple months, and then I heard about it again somewhere on the internet in late 2013 when we had the big price rise up to $1,000. And I was like, whoa, so this thing isn't dead yet. This, Satoshi Nakamoto guy hasn't like exited his Ponzi scheme yet, like allowing the house of cards to collapse. And I thought, okay, this is kind of cool. Like I, had a computer science and mathematic background, and like started like poking around the software and seeing like how this thing actually works. Like I didn't understand initially when I read about Bitcoin that it isn't like controlled by the Satoshi guy. It's actually software that everybody runs on their own machine that collectively enforces the rules. So I was like, well, okay, this is cool. I mean, I'd like to, buy at least a little bit of Bitcoin. And I was a college student at the time, didn't have much money, but I thought, okay, I'll try and get my hands on it. And so I tried to open an account on the infamous exchange Mt. Gox, and thankfully never got through the AML KYC procedures. And most of your listeners probably know this, Mt. Gox went under, I think 2 months later, and fire and fury, flames, just collapse. But one of the big takeaways I had out of the whole Mt. Gox thing is like a new person, like kind of watching this like fledgling ecosystem, was like you could literally have the biggest business in Bitcoin fail in such a catastrophic way and not have the underlying like system affected at all. Like the blockchain itself, the peer-to-peer network itself was, just more or less indifferent. And in the wake of kind of like the 2008, 2009 financial crisis, we saw how there was a systemic risk by these institutions being irresponsible with their capital, and that didn't actually affect Bitcoin itself. The blockchain, the peer-to-peer protocol, even the community, more or less, came out relatively unscathed, and that like kind of what is the moment that I was really sold on Bitcoin, and knew I wanted to like play a part in the ecosystem. And so ever since then, I've been working on Bitcoin and Bitcoin related stuff. I've got a protocol implementation of Bitcoin called Bitcoin S, which I've been pushing lately. And then I also founded a company in 2015 called Suredbits.
Yeah, like I'm interested to hear like what made you want to work with Bitcoin and Scala, and like how exactly, what, as you move forward with Bitcoin and Scala, like was that really just a continuation of an education process on your own, or did you feel like this was a better, like not a better solution, but something that could help with the Bitcoin ecosystem?
So it started out definitely as an educational thing, whereas like, okay, I want to learn how this stuff actually works. I think I remember a quote from Jeff Garzik in like mid 2015, I believe, where he said, I think Bitcoin was a 5 or 10 bill at the time, and probably 20 people actually understand how it works. And so that's, like $100 million worth of value assigned to each of those developers collectively. And I think if you're looking for job security in the space, if you learn how these systems work, you're never going to have an employment problem again. And that's the angle I kind of took at it initially. And the only other available library on the JVM at the time was this library called Bitcoin J. And Bitcoin J had its issues, and it just, I had general gripes about the software and architecture and things like that. And then also Bitcoin J now is more or less a dead project, and we're looking to be the project that kind of takes over the a whole Left by Bitcoin Jay and Mike Hearn when he kind of rage quit the space. So now I've been updating Bitcoin S regularly, and like we kind of have it under the Suredbits umbrella, even though it's an open source project under the MIT license. We're the main maintainers, and we're looking to eventually sell like service and support contracts and things like that down the line when more people integrate it.
Okay, and how exactly does Bitcoin S interact with Bitcoin D?
So we have an RPC client on Bitcoin S, so you can spin up your own Bitcoin D instance and just make normal RPC calls into Bitcoin D and allow Bitcoin D to do all the validation and stuff. I'm interested in. I've played around with turning Bitcoin S into an SPV node a couple years ago, and I'm very interested in putting neutrino support in Bitcoin S, because I think that's going to be the next generation of light clients for mobile and for Lightning Network stuff, which is what we're working on at Suredbits. So I think that would be a add to try and be one of the most stable libraries that provide support for that.
Right. Like you said, it's there's a lot been going on these past 2 weeks, and it sounds like you guys are staying right up with developments. And I saw you put out a recent pull request for property-based testing in Bitcoin Core to try and help, flush out some of these possible bugs before they come about. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So like ever since I started like developing Bitcoin S, I've used this testing idiom called property-based testing in it, and it's been just invaluable tool how many like little bugs that this is like fleshed out, and like weird corner cases that I would never be able to think about. The basic premise for property-based testing is like you specify an invariant that should always hold true no matter what the given circumstances are, and then you specify a valid range of values to throw at your software to try and break that invariant that you specified. So like the classic example I like to give to people is like, I should not be able to generate the exact same private key twice from my like operating system, because you don't want collisions on your private keys, because then obviously other people can get your private key information. So that's like a very simple invariant. For every private key I generate, it should not be the same as the last private key. And you can start kind of layering these properties on top of each other to build a pretty robust set of like invariants about your system. And I recently, well, actually, this property-based testing pull request I've had on Bitcoin Core has been open for I think 2 years now. It just recently got merged, and we're still working out the build system issues with it, but it's gonna be a huge win in terms of just robustness, reliability, integrity of Bitcoin Core. And after this last week, I think we really need to be pushing for stronger testing procedures in Bitcoin Core, just even in the entire cryptocurrency ecosystem. And I think property-based testing is a good step in the right direction, because we can't, bugs like what we saw last week just like fundamentally erode people's confidence in Bitcoin. And we're very lucky that the user Many responsibly disclosed that bug and didn't try and actually exploit it, because maybe all of us would be talking about an industry that doesn't exist anymore if he didn't.
Mm-hmm. So I guess one quick question. It's generally the first thing that pops into people's minds with alternate implementations.
Sure.
Since you started developing Bitcoin S, have you guys uncovered any deviations in validation or consensus rules since the implementation from other clients?
So Bitcoin S doesn't aim to be a full node right now.
Okay,
but
so it's just a library.
It's just a library at the moment. I go back and forth about turning it into a full node. The thing with turning it into a full node is you're always going to have deviations, just like you said, with alternative implementations. And how do you come to consent? Like this is like, the age-old problem with thinking about alternative implementations. It's like, by definition, almost, they're going to not converge on consensus since it's different software. but is it good enough, and does it hedge against systemic bugs or systemic risks week? And that's like the weird line we need to think about and talk about. And I think depending on who you are, you have a different answer to that. But I don't think multiple implementations are necessarily bad, even though Satoshi has that famous quote. But depending on who you are, maybe you should just be running the canonical software. That's a very hand-wavy answer, and it's a very difficult question to answer, especially in wake of this, the latest bug we've seen in Bitcoin Core.
Well, it's just part of the reality of developing, something like this. I mean, it's like I don't hear a lot of people really talk about this too much, but I think like one of the biggest challenges and necessities going forward is actually isolating different aspects of consensus rules and then finding different ways to ensure correctness, like, especially with the data structure handling like this last bug shows, and then like Blockstream's work with simplicity to have mathematical proofs for scripts. And
Sure. I mean, like this bug was frustrating because from what I've done in the digging, it's like one bug that kind of caused another not so obvious bug to happen, and like you had to have these like two things like work in conjunction to have this possible inflation bug. But just like I don't even know how you would like actually prove that using something like Cook, which is like a theorem prover that is pretty well known in like various like industries that need high quality assurance guarantees. It's a very tough problem. And then like whenever we change things to maybe make things more testable, then you are changing the system too, and possibly introducing new attack vectors there. It's like this really weird thing that I don't know. It's just hard. It's hard to think about, and like I think like for now we should default on the side of changing nothing. Even like how we got into this whole mess was because we were optimizing, and how much optimization is too much optimization when you're possibly changing things and allowing for bugs like this to happen.
Well, I mean, it's just long term and thinking in terms of like what is doing what. I mean, that's because like I said, that's like one of the clear delineations I try to think of in terms of consensus rules is the actual script itself, and then like the kind of meta things that are happening beyond that, like interacting with data structures and the processes that govern those interactions.
Yeah, but this bug wasn't like a script bug. This was a bug in validation.c++ that propagated into the UTXOs, or the coin cache, or whatever it's called. So like that, like I'm most familiar with like the script level consensus stuff, but there's different levels of consensus. Like there's validation.c++, which does a bunch of validation meta stuff before you actually get into like transfer of ownerships in like the script engine. And then there's all the database stuff in like Ccoins cache or Ccoins view or whatever it's called. And we had a bug back in 2013 related to that, how like what was it, Level DB or Berkeley DB had like a fundamental incompatibility inside of it with like the number of locks in that it allowed, and that caused a hard fork. Like all this stuff is like you got these like various systems interacting together, and they need to interact like just right. Otherwise, you end up with consensus or incompatible consensus and divergence in the chain, and in the worst case scenario, like we saw last week, possible inflation of coins.
Well, I mean, it's just more work has to be done on really testing things and isolating what the software is actually doing. And I'm glad to see that you're actually you just had your poll merged and some more progress in that way.
And if I got to ask something from like the wider community, it's like we got to start asking for this from like the developers. I mean, we should start pointing people. Selfishly, I want people to use property-based testing because I believe it will fundamentally improve the quality guarantees we can give about Bitcoin Core, and we need to make sure that we as a community are building this culture of testing. And I think the more and more I'm in Bitcoin, the more and more I think Bitcoin is valuable because it does not change, rather than that it's possible for it to change. And eventually just making Bitcoin the code base immutable, in the sense that we're not going to change things about the code base anymore, would maybe not be the worst thing in the world, or at least around the consensus stuff.
Yeah, I saw Vladimir Vanderlaan yesterday. He was dealing with some people from Whalepool who were like accusing him of being responsible for this thing because you merged the code that was responsible. But then he was saying like, everyone likes to wax lyrical about how we're all trying to self ownership and self sovereignty with our money, and yet they all want to dogpile and blame him. And I think someone else. They're like, I've seen it a few times throughout the years, but they took that Kennedy quote and they said, "Ask not what Bitcoin can do for you, but what you can do for Bitcoin." So I like that. But the question that we just got a question from the viewers and the troll box. They were asking what the connection is between Suredbits and Bitcoin S.
So first off, we use Bitcoin S internally for stuff. We're planning on adding more protocol features to Bitcoin S. We've done contracting work in the past related to Bitcoin S, and I would like to see Bitcoin S become a full-fledged library that all JVM users use, and possibly sell support contracts on it. But the fact of the matter is that there needs to be an alternative on the JVM for people to use, at least for their application-specific functionality, and to have a nice go-between between the actual Bitcoin implementation and whatever you're actually doing in your application. So yeah, that's the long-term business model for Bitcoin S, I think, is probably something similar to Red Hat and how they run their own Linux distros and sell support contracts on those.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. Like I'm saying, the whole Suredbits thing, and that's something I'm really interested in. And y'all were talking about consensus and fleshing out all these mechanisms, everything, and you're working with Lightning. Ask you real quick, how's that been going?
It's been going good. I think the Lightning Network is where the entire industry is going to head over the next 5 years. The Lightning Network fulfills a lot of the promises that were initially made about Bitcoin, cheap, fast, instant payments that are, cheap, fast, instant payments. That's why a lot of people came to Bitcoin. And on the blockchain itself, it's hard to achieve that. Still have security, but with the Lightning Network, you get pretty good security guarantees. You can abstract away a lot of the details about fees and confirmations and things like that, and actually give people a user experience they're familiar with, while also having sound money. And then with Suredbits, we're really excited about monetizing APIs with the Lightning Network. So the first API that we're offering right now is an NFL sports data API, where you can query statistics about an ongoing NFL game in real time and pay us over the Lightning Network for that data. So we can provide people an effectively open API without requiring any sort of authentication from our users. So we don't have to know who you are. All we really care about is that you're paying us and we're serving you the data in return. So this cultivates this open ecosystem of data flow that allows people to get access to different information sources that they couldn't easily get access to before. And we believe in this permissionless sort of innovation, but with opening up various data sources for everybody to use rather than just a select few.
So you kind of go back for a second to what you said when you first got on air. So this is kind of something that came out of you looking for access to market data and realizing kind of all the frictions and problems involved. And so you thought you would try to kind of solve that with Bitcoin after you realized it wasn't just Satoshi's Ponzi scheme.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So
And like we're looking at offering, like, right now we just offer NFL data. We're going to be offering NBA data soon. The NBA season starting up, and we're looking at we're trying to partner with other like traditional financial data providers to start opening up this ecosystem for the crypto space. As institutional adoption of Bitcoin, we're going to see the price isn't going to be determined on BitMEX anymore. It'll be determined on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange or CBOE, or traditional exchanges like that. And crypto people are going to need access to that data, and that's one avenue or one data stream we're looking at providing, along with just other traditional financial market data streams.
Mm-hmm. One of like the first things I started thinking when looking at this, I know like with the sports and financial data, you're kind of looking at like more real time metrics in terms of data streams right now. But have you guys thought about systems like JSTOR or like other academic databases that generally either charge for like a membership or subscription fee, or charge outrageous prices for like one-off pieces of data due to kind of the chargeback risks and frictions involved?
I'm not super familiar with that, so maybe I'll have to take a peek at that like when we get off the air here. But I'd love to hear more about that. What we're really trying to do in a really abstract sense is like basically Suredbits takes care of all the back end stuff and like deals with like whoever the real data provider is, and we want to provide these open APIs for crypto people to call, and we don't want to know who's calling us. We just want to allow for free flow of information. And that's a very powerful idea, and I think humanity is better off if you can easily access information about things.
Can't argue with that. But Janine, you want to hop in?
Well, yeah, just to mention something about JSTOR. I mean, if you're not specifically familiar with them, it was the academic publication that Aaron Schwartz was taking data from, because he believed in freedom of information, and he thought that their prices were too high, and so that's how he ended up getting in legal trouble, was because he was publishing. That's the entity that we're talking about. But I just wanted to point out regarding your Lightning stuff that the first time Rick mentioned you to us, I saw that you got accepted as, I think, a mentor for the Chain Code Labs residency thing for Lightning in New York City.
Yeah.
So if you want to talk about that a bit.
Yeah, sure. So I know the Chain Code guys pretty well. I actually did their last hacker residency they had back in February. They had 2 sessions. The first session was a 2-week session about protocol development, kind of like more abstract, higher level ideas. And then they had a second session about actual Bitcoin core development, so the nitty gritty details. And I did the first session with them in February and had a great time. Met John, Matt Corallo, Suhas, Alex, Russ, Marco. Like, they have a really great crew up there. And I was back in New York, I think in May at some point, or now it was August, and they were talking to me about they're trying to do this Lightning application hacker residency to kind of boost LAP development. And I was telling them about what we're working on at Suredbits, and they told me they would love for me to come up there and talk about working with these various Lightning implementations and actually building LAPs. So I leapt at the idea, and I'm super excited about it. They just closed their applications, and I have heard of a few people that have been accepted, and I think they always get such a high caliber developer at these things. I'm just super excited. And then there's also going to be a FOLMA Lightning Hack Day the weekend after that. So there's going to be a lot of Lightning activity happening in New York at the end of October, and I hope to play a small piece of it and help people gain access to various pieces of data with the Suredbits APIs. Like I think there's a lot of interesting Lightning applications to be built around monetizing APIs in general.
Yeah, so far there's been 3 Lightning Hack Days, and they've all taken place in Berlin. So, not surprised that they're adding new locations, because probably a lot of, I mean, there are quite a number of Americans that I saw coming over for the Berlin ones, but there was also a lot of German developers that I wasn't familiar with before. Yeah, good. Shinobi wants them to add a few more cities as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about going over to Berlin for one of these Lightning Hack Days because I see the activity on Twitter, and we're, a Lightning company, and I obviously want to, first off, selfishly help promote Suredbits, and then second off, I really care about this ecosystem and want to see the Lightning Network grow in general. I think it's such a great example of how technology can be built on top of Bitcoin and not necessarily cannibalize the underlying blockchain or like harm the underlying system. And Lightning is just going to be a great user experience, in my opinion. Like, there's a lot of building going on right now, and there's still rough edges, but I don't see any fundamental limitations that shouldn't make Lightning the application or the layer that everybody's using in the future, unless you're transferring millions or hundreds of millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I guess it is time for me to do what I do and put you on the spot with a question about the technicals.
Okay.
So with Lightning itself, like, obviously the whole reason this works is the atomicity of the payment. It either completely goes through or it fails across the board. And so the one question I have about Suredbits, and really more about like Lightning kind of working with APIs in general, is ensuring the atomicity of the receipt of the data in exchange for the payment. And so I'm kind of wondering about like what your initial thoughts were when you first started building this company, and then any work or kind of looking into adapter signatures with Schnorr that you might be doing kind of in preparation for that being deployed down the road.
So I want to make sure I understand the question. So like how I think about monetizing APIs is there's kind of two distinct categories. There's the simple request response that everybody's familiar with, sort of like a REST API, and then there's like WebSocket data streams. So the NFL API that Suredbits offers is a simple request response API, and the handshake goes like this: the user sends us a request wanting the score of the Denver Broncos and Minnesota Vikings football game, let's say. We send in response a Lightning Network invoice for them to pay to be able to get access to this data. The user then needs to pay the Lightning Network invoice, and if our Lightning Network node accepts or recognizes that payment happened over the Lightning Network, we send the score of the Denver Broncos and Minnesota Vikings football game back. Fundamentally, though, so like that isn't atomic, because like what could happen there is we could vanish and never ever send the Minnesota Vikings and Denver Broncos football game score back. I was talking about this actually with John Newberry from Chaincode, and he said, well, Chris, like you can just encrypt the entire payload of the what the actual score of the Minnesota Vikings and Denver Broncos football game on the initial response. And then when they actually send the Lightning Network payment, they get that pre-image that's revealed to them to be able to accept that Lightning Network payment, or for us to accept the Lightning Network payment. And then they can use that pre-image to decrypt the payload. So they don't have to trust us to actually send back the response. I will caveat it and say it's not currently implemented on the Suredbits API, but that's like, one of these things we want to go towards. So we do get this atomic behavior going on for these request reply APIs. And I just said a bunch of words right there, but it's very interesting how you can like even embed information into the like Lightning Network itself. Like Alex Bosworth has had some really interesting tweets lately about that, and we're looking into these things to be able to offer more trustless APIs. But at the end of the day, users are trusting us to relay the correct information us not lying about, what the score of the Minnesota Vikings and Denver Broncos football game is. There's always going to be some degree of trust because you need someone to port in information happening from the outside world.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, there's nothing wrong with some element of trust in a model like this. Like you said, it's pretty much impossible to avoid because you're effectively dealing with an oracle. Yeah. But I'm glad to hear that you're actually looking into the adapter signatures and trying to kind of get as much atomicity in this kind of transaction as possible, because at the end of the day, as a business, if you start not providing data or providing false data, then the whole business model kind of falls apart. So you have a huge incentive to not do that.
Yes, absolutely. Another thing we're really interested in, I don't know if you guys have heard about this, is TAD Striga's discrete log contracts. So that allows you to push data in blockchains in a semi-trustless way. Like the model is set up so that you can lie, but you can't lie to certain people. So basically, if we're going back to the Minnesota Vikings and Denver Broncos example, is I either have to tell everybody that the Minnesota Vikings won or everybody that the Denver Broncos won. I can't tell, Donald Trump that the Vikings won and then Barack Obama that the Broncos won. I can't equivocate on my lie. I must lie to everybody in this exact same way, which is really powerful. And, we have that on our long-term roadmap, thinking about how to use oracles in an effective manner on blockchains, actually.
Well, that's excellent to hear. I mean, it seems like you're really thinking through how to actually minimize the trust involved with this as much as possible.
Yep.
But Janine, got something to pitch in?
I mostly have a question. Maybe you could kind of give some examples of what the user experience would look like doing this, because someone in the troll box said, what? I would be paying per API call? What would that even look like? That sounds kind of weird. And I pointed out to them that how Lightning is able to do sub-Satoshi amounts, they wouldn't be paying a few cents or anything.
Yeah.
It would be could be really small. So maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, so definitely we are doing the pay-per-call model. I don't think we're not targeting end users though. We're kind of targeting other developers that have an idea that they want to implement and use our APIs to actually have that idea come to fruition. It's up to that developer. It's his or her choice if they want to actually charge their end users based on per API call. But we're definitely setting up our business model to target other developers that want to build interesting applications. So that's kind of who our target customer is. It's not necessarily someone that is wanting to look at the ESPN scoreboard at the end of the day and see what the scores are. We're more of interested in the people that are actually implementing the ESPN scoreboard and doing interesting things based on that.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's all real interesting, man. I really appreciate the thought that y'all are putting into this work. And that's where, whenever I ran into your guy here in town, I was really just kind of my hair blown back and saying wow, there's some real things going on here now. And so I really wanted to connect with you guys and see what's going on. But I also want to ask you, because we are here in the United States and there's all these different mixed rule sets about what it's like working in crypto, and some people still saying that well, this looks highly illegal, and this but then other people saying this looks like a real promising thing. What's it like business here in the United States trying to develop in Bitcoin?
I think for our business, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of legality or regulatory concerns. We're not acting as custodians or transferring money on the behalf of other people. We're a pretty simple service provider. But to be fair, we're a new business. We have a new business model that didn't exist in the old world. And maybe there is concerns that we don't know about. We haven't had anybody come knocking on our door yet, asking questions. So
yeah, it's just
but there's always a possibility that this happens. Say if we become widely adopted and we start doing a bunch of Oracle stuff, I think there probably will be regulatory concerns around that, especially if like large contracts on blockchains like start being settled based on like what our Oracle is saying. I mean, I would imagine in that case, like there might be people like wondering who is the actual people, providing this information. How do you know it's valid? Blah, blah, blah.
Right. I mean, like just thinking about how there is like these different networks in Bitcoin, and I was listening to one of your talks yesterday about how it's interesting how there's these different groups that are in this decentralized community, and we don't really know exactly that we're next to each other. And I know that you got a guy out here in Colorado, and there's a lot of stuff going on here, but also in New York, and some surprising things in Wyoming, and some of these states are actually recognizing that this could be good for their state. And maybe Iowa's one of those that's going to pick up on what you guys are putting. We might want to put some favorable regulations in place to help these guys move forward.
Yeah. I hear the Wyoming situation is like really interesting. I know they just had a huge, like, we were thinking about going out to this like Ethereum. I think it was like what's the, I can't remember what the word is, like, hackathon. Yes. The hackathon. Exactly. Right. They were getting some pretty big names to show up for that, for a smaller state like Wyoming. And I hope most states go with the laissez-faire like philosophy with this stuff and see what can happen. But I think a lot of like crypto is very interesting kind of in a wider context, because I think you see a lot more people just in like different locations doing things and not necessarily all concentrated like in Silicon Valley. And I think that's probably good for like the wider society to have a little bit more of a distribution or decentralization of like all this like technical talent, and like, the move towards working remotely, like figuring out those tools, figuring out how to manage a team effectively remotely. That kind of, there was a phrase I heard recently. It was like, releases the tyranny of location or something like that. And I thought that was a very interesting idea.
Random rants, because I always look for the opportunity to rant about this. You should check out the book, The Sovereign Individual by, I think, James Davidson and William Rees Mogg. It's from 1999 and pretty all about technology kind of disrupting, being tied to a specific style. And they actually kind of predicted something like Bitcoin back then.
Peter Thiel, I don't know if you guys listen. I'm a big Peter Thiel fan, and he had a podcast with Dave Rubin recently, and he was talking about how in like the 1960s, like computing was like extremely centralized. There was basically a few mainframes that ran all the world's computing power, and then in the 1990s, like all this stuff had kind of decentralized, and everyone was excited about tech, being decentralized and all this stuff, and then it's kind of re-centralized back into Silicon Valley. It's maybe we're seeing a little bit of a decentralization happening again with tech, which I think would be healthy.
All right, Janine, go on and get it out of the way. Come on.
I'm not going to do it. I don't have to do it on air. I just want to say that I just got triggered by your mention of Peter Thiel, because I have let's say misgivings about his ethics, considering he is I don't know if he's the CEO still, but he was the founder of Palantir, which is a company that builds surveillance software for the NSA.
Yeah. In his podcast, he was definitely trying to frame like his involvement in Palantir in like a way that was like trying to enhance civil liberties post 9/11. And I don't know. I mean, like, I don't know how much I buy his argument, but like his argument was that if you have something like 9/11 happen, you need to prevent it from happening again. Otherwise, there will be no civil liberties. So like he made the argument that it was either you have Palantir, like probably sifting through every single scrap of data that you've ever had, or you just have no civil liberties because your government won't allow you to do anything freely anymore. Whether you buy that argument or not, like, I don't know, but that's how he pitched it, because I kind of had the exact same, skeptical eyes towards Peter Thiel on the Palantir stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think he would know better, because if considering his company partnered with the NSA, I'm sure people at the NSA probably told him that, hey, we actually warned the White House about this and they didn't do anything.
Yeah.
So
All right,
I
so
think he
Chris,
knows. Anyway,
when are you gonna port Suredbits in a reverse direction so that we get paid for the government prying into all of it?
I mean, if the government, wants to send over a multi-billion-dollar contract, I got my pen here. I can sign it at any time.
exactly. I want them to pay me for all the API calls they make to all the services we use.
Yeah.
Great.
Let's do that. I want to see them buy some Bitcoin.
So this is the interesting thing about the Lightning Network stuff is in a wider context, what Suredbits is doing is just machine to machine payments in a trustless fashion. And machine to machine payments is a very big buzzword, and people make it seem like it's, I don't know, it's this cool thing. And basically the Lightning Network has solved this problem without talking about it at all. And that's super exciting for me. And thinking about how you can now, well, maybe it's actually somewhat frightening too, but how machines can maybe have their own little economies going on without having to get permission from the banks to actually transfer these payments.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's the perfect example of censorship resistance. Not a lot of people are aware of this, but we've been capable of doing micropayments since the 90s, and this was actually something that a lot of banks looked heavily into. And the reason that they ended up not offering these services isn't because of the cost; it's because of the worry for things like money laundering, when you're able to just programmatically shuffle money around and not really have human beings looking at it.
Yeah, and going back to the censorship resistance idea, it's I think that's probably the number one value add proposition of Bitcoin is censorship resistance. That's what it does very well, and that's what we need to protect, because you can always build a centralized system on top of a censorship resistant system, but you can't go in reverse. And Bitcoin is one thing that it's done fundamentally is create this weird decentralized censorship resistant network. Block Digest, I'll ask you, so if Bitcoin could be completely centralized but still be censorship resistant, would you be cool with that?
Personally, yes.
Yeah.
I think that and the monetary supply are the most
about you,
important
Janine?
core properties.
I fundamentally believe that the decentralization is part of the censorship resistance, but assuming that would not be the case, I guess so, because I want the censorship resistance. The decentralization is just a part. It's the way you get to
It's how
that.
you implement it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Rick, same thing?
Yeah, that's where I would think about the exact same lines, is that decentralization is kind of censorship resistance. But if there's a technical way to achieve that, I think that that's something that could be certainly useful in making sure that everybody has a censorship resistant money.
Yeah, I mean that, and that's why I totally agree with you guys. I think if it could be implemented, the only other thing that's good about a decentralized network is you can make arguments about this, but you get maybe higher uptime because it's just more distributed, and it's harder to take out the entire network. But if you run a homogeneous client too, like we just saw last week, you also have systemic risks. But yeah, I mean, I think it's always a fun thought experiment, because I agree with what Blockjai just said. It's the two things that I think get most people interested in Bitcoin is the whole fixed money supply and the censorship resistance. And if it could be implemented in an alternative fashion, maybe we would be okay with that. But since it can't in the current incarnation, that's why it's so important that we have this heterodox set of miners. So we make sure that maybe controversial transactions are still getting settled on chain, rather than 3 miners that you have to go through AML KYC procedures to be able to actually do your transaction.
Mm-hmm. I mean, believe me, if we could do that, any other way, I would be all for it. But it's just, like you said, the uptime is a necessity for censorship resistance, the redundancy, and
Yeah.
even just the mining incentives to ensure they keep running and are a distributed like entity. Like I see absolutely no way without hand wavy magic to actually accomplish all those properties.
So I want to ask you guys another question that I think about a lot, like in the wider context of Bitcoin, is like, what do you guys think the end like success scenario is for proof of work? Like in 100 years, there's no inflation anymore. I'm guessing that we will have found some sort of equilibrium for mining, or maybe does proof of work end up being centralized with the way that incentives are set up right now? Like, do you guys think there is a long-term success case for proof of work?
Absolutely. I think that in the long term, like you said, it will find an equilibrium. Like one of the biggest fallacies people like to throw out there is that energy consumption will just go up forever. But we need food, we need houses, we need transportation, we need all of these other things that will always have demand to create profit incentive to make it. And the way difficulty adjustments work, like eventually Bitcoin is it's not going to just go up in price forever. It will hit a point where those margins meet, and then other things will always have an economic demand for production.
I worry though, like when it does hit that equilibrium, that there'll be one, that the set of miners will be a set of one, and like the one miner will have out miners because he has some like crazy cheap energy supply, or I don't know, like some competitive advantage that no one else can replicate. And like this is like where I go next in this thought experiment. It's like, okay, so we end up with this one set of miner that theoretically has a competitive advantage to everybody else and runs everybody else out of business. And like, is the long-term successful scenario proof of work mining actually having nation states adversarially mine against each other to keep the network going? Like, so you have Russia mining against the US because they both want to be able to use the network that's rather than having this one miner. I don't know. This is like things that I've thought about a lot.
It very well could, but by the same token, like watching these economic incentives play out long term, I don't think that governments are going to have the money to do anything except provide the services people want. And I mean, like just looking at the economic arbitrage aspect, like cheap energy will attract miners until energy isn't cheap. And then that cycle will repeat itself over and over again until electrical prices kind of smooth out. And I think like it's just as likely, you think, and we could wind up in a situation where governments mine. I think it's more likely that we'll see a kind of hybridized landscape of wealthy individuals, corporate players, and potentially governments who can find a way to cost effectively do it.
It's interesting.
My comment would be more about talking about concentration than centralization, because I don't know if centralization would be the right word, but like because we had another special edition with someone in the mining community from Canada about Bitcoin and renewable energy. And one of the things I've seen on Twitter recently is that someone said that Bitcoin wouldn't be suited to renewable energy because you have things like solar, which is not obviously, well, he was making the claim that it wasn't 24-hour. But when you have an entire planet, you could have people mining at different times of the day and then storing the excess energy to continue mining during the non-sunlight hours, obviously. So I think that initially, if there's going to be any kind of concentration of mining, I mean, right now we're seeing geographically, because you have a lot of renewable energy sources in places like China that don't have a distribution network to spread it to the rest of the country. And so the miners are concentrating in the areas where the renewable energy is being generated. But once like other kinds of sources are explored more, or they get better in terms of efficiency, like you might have concentration around the most sunny areas of the planet or something, or the areas that have, because like Iceland has hydrothermal. But even then, if you have that kind of geographic concentration in areas where renewable energy is the easiest to access or the most plentiful, you would still have to consider are those jurisdictions actually friendly to mining? Like, even if they might be really friendly in terms of energy sources, they might not be friendly in terms of the governments that are controlling that land, if they are still controlling that land at the time that we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, that's a great point. I think that the actual governments mining against governments, that could be a thing for a minor period of time, like a small period of time. But I think that the incentives in Bitcoin and just like the small amount of people that actually get the whole decentralization, censorship resistance, and like the need for it, and I think that there's already just like too much personal incentive for people to come together across geographical boundaries that are basically building a powerful. Yeah, there's going to be winners, right? There's going to be a small group probably that do like keep moving forward, and because they find the favorable energy and they find the right jurisdiction. But at the same time, I think it does sort of like level out the playing field as far as cost of energy. And I think we will see some weird points in time where there are like towns that are more powerful than the state government because they decided to get in early. And there's just there's going to be some weird dynamics there. And there's definitely, it's hard to really play out all the way, but I don't think that really governments are going to be in control of this. It's just too much where it's not the incentive for them, because right now they have the control over these things that help them pick the winners and losers in these games. So I think it's going to be individuals within certain institutions that see the play and they make the move first. And it'll definitely be a game, but yeah, I think that it'll eventually play out to where we do have like a sound money that's global, that actually a price reflects the supply and demand to a given region, and yeah, that the electricity cost is all been commoditized with proof of work.
Game of coins.
Yeah, we're coming up on the 1 hour mark, and I know that that's what we try to keep our additions to, man. But it's really been nice having you on here talk about this, and kind of just expand the Bitcoin discussion, and into Scala, Suredbits, and just like this the questions you ask guys. I like it. I always like meeting and discussing these things with people that are have that lens. They have the perspective. They know what this is all about. That's why I run this meetup here, and I'm glad that we can build up this network of people that know each other, that understand where we're going and everything. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah. If I come out there and visit Nadav, I'll be sure to stop in and say hi to you in person. I'm gonna give myself one last plug before I get off the air. Go follow us at Suredbits on Twitter. My personal Twitter handle is Chris_Stewart_5. For companies like us to be successful, we need the help from the community to tell people about how people are using Bitcoin in the right way, and kind of look forward thinking of like how these things can be used in the future, and actually give people a different sort of, I guess, give people access to things they didn't have access to before in a way that doesn't harm the underlying blockchain or use it irresponsibly. So we're looking to add more APIs, and I would love to hear from you. You guys can email me, chris@suredbits.com, with things you would like to see available via our API, because we're looking to get more useful data sources on there too.
Mm-hmm. Well, once again, thanks a lot for coming on. It's been an interesting conversation. And now that I've let this go on for about 20 seconds trolling Janine, I think she wants to make a joke before we get off the air.
Well, not a joke. I just kind of want to poke fun about a prediction that someone made almost a year ago now, that I made fun of, which was when the No2x stuff finally ended, because a bunch of the people who were running it decided to give up on that. I actually am not have to check if this is the right article, because there was two of them, but basically from Ars Technica made this assertion when I was trying to correct his article, which had a number of mistakes in it, that Lightning was not going to be viable. And it's just so funny to look back at that now, because clearly it is. There's a lot of people working on it. It's been on mainnet's been working for a while now, which I think surprised even people who were in favor of it and excited about it. So yeah, journalists, you got to stop making bad predictions because it's going to bite you in the ass within a year.
All right, though. So I guess that about wraps her up. One last time, Chris, really appreciate you coming on. I'm confident to say after talking to you for the last hour that you are really putting some thought into this business model and making it as trustless as possible. So really excited to see how this plays out. And I hope everybody watching found this a real interesting talk. So I guess you'll see us tomorrow for our regular episode. Toodaloo.
Later, everyone.